Hi, everybody. I'm Olivia Collette.
And I'm Randy Masters.
And this is Making Nice. And this time around, we're making nice on war. Real war. Not just war of words or war of slogans or picket signs, but real actual war that people are fighting with machine guns and armies and what have you. My feelings on any war are very, very, very mixed. I grew up in an army setting in Germany. Germany, the reason Canadians were there, they were there on the army base. They were there as peacekeepers. I've read articles recently that suggest that it'll be a while before Canadians go on a peacekeeping mission again. But I've said this to you personally, that politicians send troops to war, and that those wars are usually fought for economic reasons. They're not very often fought for ideological reasons. The ideological reasons are what's presented in the media as, you know, the reason we're going to this war, but usually the real reason is economic. The ideological reason is presented to demonize the enemy so that we can justify to ourselves, you know, why we're going in there. Having grown up in a military setting where, you know, my stepfather was in the army and my uncle was as well, and they had a bunch of army friends, you know, I mean, it creates a peculiar kind of person that is able to withstand a lot of pain and agony and still react quickly to change and to changing situations. And, you know, it takes a lot of training to get to that point. It's necessary for those kinds of situations. And although I believe that most of the wars that we fight are unnecessary, I have a real problem with people showing up at some sort of military parade and, you know, throwing rotten tomatoes and heckling at the soldiers. I think the soldiers are doing their job. They're doing a job that nobody wants to do. It's something that breaks my heart when I see it. But listen, enough about that. Tell me about your experience.
Yeah, and that's disgraceful, and I have seen that in person. I saw it at the Berkeley, California recruiting center, where the Code Pink team is set up in front of the recruiting station, disgracing our soldiers every day. You know, the soldiers in America are it's an all-volunteer force, and they are some of the best and brightest in the country. Mm-hmm. It is oftentimes an economic necessity to go in, but that's not the only reason. There are people volunteering for good patriotic reasons. We just today, President Obama awarded 2 Medal of Honors. One to a gentleman who's served in Iraq twice, in Afghanistan 6 or 7 times, and suffered devastating injuries and re-upped and went again. Mm-hmm. So kudos to the president for giving him the Medal of Honor, nation's highest award. So, you know, interestingly enough, I served 11 years, veteran of the U.S. Air Force, and my role was to defend Germany in my first military station. I was stationed in Fairbanks, Alaska, and we had tank killer aircraft, and our aircraft were designed, if Russia were to come into Germany through the Fulda Gap, then our aircraft were to deploy over the pole through Norway into Germany and defend. So from Alaska, we were very aware that was early 80s. The Cold War was very hot. Even from Alaska, we were very aware of the threat of Russia and the Soviet communism. We have enemies in the world, and you know, the purpose of the military is deterrent for the most part, and fight a war if we have to. So, you know, soldiers are just as much as anybody, you know, war, what is it good for? We're not in it for war. But when you have to fight, when you're called to fight, you have to be prepared to do that. You need trained forces, equipped soldiers ready to go do that. We're involved in a lot of hot wars right now. A lot of good policy debate on that. You know, I have my own feelings on Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya that we're currently drawn into. I don't know how many of those situations Canadians, I'm sure, are serving. You know, maybe you could tell me they're serving in Iraq. And
there's definitely a Canadian presence in Afghanistan. Not yet in Libya. Give it time. I think when it comes to Iraq, because you have such solid backing from the UK, the presence, and I'm sure someone would correct me on this. So all I'm saying is that our presence there is minimal, if it's there at all. In any case, when it comes to these things, what the Canadian Army generally does is it transports goods and weapons to the U.S. Army.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the U.S. Army does all the dirty work.
We're disproportionately called on to defend the world.
Yeah.
And why do we still have troops in South Korea? Why do we still have troops in Europe? Those are all good policy questions. You know,
there are bases, there are American bases in a surprising number of countries around the world, and I think it would shock some people to first of all know that those bases are there and that they're active, and also, you know, the reasons why they're there at all. What is it that we're there for? What are we doing?
Right.
What's the project? You know, and I mean, I'm not a big believer in conspiracy theories. I'm not suggesting anything like that. I'm not suspicious or anything like that. As I say, I think usually the reasons for going into any war are very, very simple and usually economical, and, you know, or we're after a resource that we want to control. I think it would surprise people just how many American bases there are around the world. And,
right, and they're a force for good. Column this week about South Korea and the South Koreans wanting us to leave, and you know, the author of the column asked, you know, can you see the obvious difference between South Korea and North Korea? Mm-hmm. And the reason South Korea is a prosperous, thriving country in part is because America spent 39,000 dead and 80,000 wounded in winning their freedom and protecting them since then. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the military is a force for good in those senses. South Korea is much better off than North Korea and the crazy despot that's running that country and starving its people. You know, but wars are, you know, political issues in a sense. Afghanistan was the good war after 9/11, but we've been there way too long. There's no reason for us to be there 10 years later. Iraq was a very divisive war.
Well, because
Libya
it's now been, you know, proven that the reasons for going into that war were actually not the reasons, and you know, once those reasons were disproved, like the presence in Iraq continued. But I mean, here's the thing, and this is why I'm kind of split on these issues, and I think it's worthwhile to have reasonable civil discussions about this.
Sure.
Firstly, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, the Taliban is a you know, it's a genuine force to be reckoned with. So to have gone in and tried to stabilize that is, you know, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it and say that it's good. It's a much more complex issue, but it's worthwhile to, I think, have brought in introduced a climate where people can at least have discussions about it that's going somewhere. In Iraq, I have a friend who immigrated from Iraq to Canada as a refugee. So I asked him about this. Obviously, I was very interested. I was like, well, how do you feel about the U.S. presence in Iraq? And he says, look, you know, I mean, I'm not crazy about the bombings and about the initial attacks, but they did actually stabilize the political climate of that country. And I think it's worthwhile to note as well that from his perspective, and I realize that there are a lot of points of view, I'm not saying he represents all of Iraq, there are a lot of points of view that should be explored here, but what he said was that Saddam Hussein's trial, probably because of the presence of the U.S. Army and U.S. policies, they were very kind to Saddam Hussein, and that had he been tried without the presence of the U.S., that he would have been tortured, that his children would have been tortured. I mean, they're still on the lookout for his wife who escaped, I believe, and you know, and that his wife would have been tortured publicly as well. You know, that they would have been. It wouldn't have been a simple hanging. He would have been publicly shamed before being allowed to die, and because that was the measure of his crimes. That was how his crimes ranked. And so, and I didn't, I just heard that from him, but from other people I heard that, who were also Iraqi or who came from Iraq, that, no, nobody really wants an invasion, but a lot of people want Saddam Hussein out. He's a dictator, and we don't agree with his policies. We don't agree with some of the things he's done.
And he killed hundreds of thousands of people, of his own people, a year, and he was a threat to the region. So, what, there are good policy disputes on both sides of the Iraq War. I understand that. I think the people who call Bush and Cheney a war criminal because of our actions are pushing too hard. And that's part of the reason why I say it's going to be a political war in 2012, is because they're pushing it to that extreme. To call the president I voted for twice a war criminal for the action in Iraq is pushing too hard. And so I encourage my friends on the left, just knock that off.
But I think something similar is going to happen to President Obama because of Libya anyway, so I think it's kind of going to even itself out, and war criminals, they're usually deemed as such if they're caught and tried, but otherwise they don't get to face that kind of justice in the same way that people who lose a war might.
Right. Exactly.
So that'll, I'm not saying that they're not war criminals. I'm just saying that that's usually a judgment that's bestowed upon people who lose a war. The Iraq War wasn't exactly lost. Some people on the left and maybe even on the right are certainly disheartened at the misdirection, the way that the Bush administration misled the public about their reasons for going in there.
The burden on the Iraq War was on Saddam Hussein to prove he didn't have weapons. And what we learned in his interrogation after his arrest was that he was intentionally deceiving the world that he did have weapons because he didn't want Iran to come in after him. He was more afraid of Iran than he was of us. And he lied to the world that he had weapons to keep Iran out. George Bush did not lie to us. Saddam Hussein lied to the world.
Yeah.
But a bigger point, a broader point is, soldiers live kind of by the Powell doctrine, which is, if we are going to go to war, what are the contexts we're going to go to war on? We're going to go to war on our national interests. It's really a national security interest, and we're going to go in committed to win. Now, America's fought a lot of wars in the last 2 decades where we don't appear to be committed to win. If you think about how much firepower America could truly bring on our enemy, if we were fully engaged in an all-out war on our enemy, the nuclear weaponry we could use, the advanced bombery we could use, we could rain devastation on any country that we chose to. We don't. We are a humanitarian country. When we're attacked and we have to fight, we fight with laser-guided smart bombs that go after the individuals and don't devastate whole neighborhoods.
Although that would be debated also, but how smart are these smart bombs?
Well, they're way better than they were in World War II. We spent a lot of money developing laser-guided smart bombs to be humane and when we have to go to war. So I look at Libya, which I think is an illegal war, and I think we went in there not in our national interests, not with a goal to win, and we're now bogged down into an illegal stalemate that's getting people killed for what reason? And soldiers want, if we're going to go to war, it's because it's our national interest, and we are going to be committed to win. If you ask me right now in Afghanistan what the definition of winning is, I don't know. Barack Obama doesn't know. Barack Obama disdains the idea of winning. He says, there's no more winning. There's no more signing a peace treaty on the deck of a ship. There is no more winning. Well, I don't want a commander-in-chief that has that view of winning and will take our troops to war. So war is a very serious, deadly, awful thing. And if we're going to go in, what are we in now? 3 countries now: Libya, Yemen, Somalia. What's the goal there? What's the commitment to win? It's not going well in the war front.
The definition of winning too. Anyway,
if you don't know, you don't commit troops.
Well,
you don't fight a war if you don't know what winning means.
Yeah.
And our president does not know what winning means.
Well, yeah. Anyway, we're gonna have to wrap it up because we're already over the time. But
This is a hot button topic for me.
Too big a topic for 15 minutes. But as usual,
yes.
lovely discussing it with you, and we'll see you around for the next episode.
Look forward to comments on this one.
Me too. Bye bye.
All right. Thank you, Olivia.